Leading Hong Kong pro-democracy activist Agnes Chow has spoken to NHK World
that on Sunday she had left for Canada and probably won't return to Hong Kong.
Prominent activist who helped spearhead pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong says she will skip bail and stay in Canada.
Hi everyone, and welcome to another obscure Asian story. In recent weeks, you might have come across the name Agnes Chow a few times. In the beginning of December 2023, she was reported to have fled to Canada on every major news site. This decision defies a warning from Hong Kong's leader that she would be pursued for life. But who is she? Agnes Chow is a pro-democracy activist from Hong Kong. However, she couldn't deal with her limited freedoms anymore. Chow, who has been in Toronto for 3 months, expressed that she lived in constant fear and silence due to intense scrutiny from authorities over several years and the confiscation of her passport. Considering the political situation in Hong Kong, her personal health, and the high political risk of being barred from leaving Hong Kong again, she decided not to return. Chow was released from prison in June 2021 after being jailed for unauthorized assembly. Her passport was confiscated, her movements closely monitored, and she had difficulties in finding a full-time job, opening a bank account, or renting an apartment. She told reporters that the fear of being jailed again led to her suffering from panic attacks, and she was diagnosed with depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. Hong Kong authorities allowed her to travel to Toronto for a master's degrees program this year, but only if she agreed to a one-day trip to the Chinese city of Shenzhen. There, Chow was chaperoned by 5 police officers and photographed at a patriotic exhibition showcasing China's achievements and the headquarters of technology firm Tencent. She was required to write and sign several letters drafted by her police handlers, including one of the repentance and one of thanks to authorities. She also wasn't allowed to book a cheaper flight to Canada with a transit stop in Japan. She had to buy a direct flight to Toronto.
The Hong Kong SL government will spare no effort in pursuing justice.
The current Hong Kong leader, John Lee, described Chow's stories as lies and devoid of integrity, and the government is trying to pursue and arrest her.
It shows that the fugitive is a liar, is a hypocrite.
The biggest tragedy of this all, she isn't the only one. Many people in Hong Kong are still being sent to prison, suppressed, and unable to speak freely. But what has happened in Hong Kong for all of this to occur? For this story to begin, we have to return to the year 2019. In March 2019, the Hong Kong government proposed a bill allowing extraditions to mainland China, sparking the largest series of protests in Hong Kong's history. The proposed bill was called the Fugitive Offenders and Mutual Legal Assistance in Criminal Matters Legislation Amendment Bill 2019. This was in response to the 2018 murder of Poon Hyo Wing by her boyfriend Chan Tong Kai in Taiwan, a case involving 2 Hong Kong tourists. Since there is no extradition treaty with Taiwan due to China's non-recognition of Taiwan's sovereignty, the Hong Kong government proposed an amendment to establish a mechanism for case-by-case transfers of fugitives to any jurisdiction lacking a formal extradition treaty. However, the inclusion of mainland China in the amendment raised concerns among Hong Kong society. Citizens, academics, and the legal profession feared that this would erode the one country, two systems principle in place since the 1997 handover, as it would blur the separation of Hong Kong's jurisdiction from the legal system administered by the Chinese Communist Party. Moreover, Hong Kong citizens have reservations about China's judiciary system and human rights protection due to its history of suppressing political dissent. Opponents of the bill urged the Hong Kong government to consider other mechanisms, such as extradition arrangements solely with Taiwan, and to sunset the arrangement immediately after the suspect's surrender. But there were other reasons for the protests as well. The Hong Kong people have already been living on the edge and worry of the Chinese government following the unsuccessful Umbrella Revolution in 2014 and the imprisonment of democracy activists in 2017. Anti-mainland sentiment grew in the 2010s due to factors like the daily quota of 150 immigrants from China since 1997 and the influx of mainland visitors, which strained Hong Kong's public services and impacted local culture. Polls showed that fewer young people in Hong Kong identified as Chinese nationals, with younger respondents expressing greater distrust of the Chinese government. Hong Kong citizens began to fear the erosion of their autonomy as China's government seemed to increasingly interfere with Hong Kong's affairs. Xi Jinping's rise to power in 2012 marked a shift towards a more authoritarian approach, notably seen at the construction of Xinjiang internment camps, which fueled concerns about Hong Kong's future. Scandals and corruption in China, along with controversial policies like the moral and national education controversy in 2012 and the Express Rail Link project, shook people's confidence in China's political systems and were seen as attempts by Beijing to strengthen its control over Hong Kong. By 2019, almost no Hong Kong youth identified solely as Chinese. The Umbrella Revolution inspired some and led to a political awakening, but its failure prompted a re-evaluation of protest strategies. A consensus emerged that peaceful protests were ineffective in advancing democratic development. The 2019 protests were driven more by desperation than optimism, with the focus shifting from withdrawing the bill to achieving promised freedoms and liberties. The protests in Hong Kong started with a sit-in at the government headquarters on March 15, 2019. This was followed by a large-scale protest on June 9, 2019. On June 12, a gathering outside the Legislative Council complex delayed the second reading of the bill. After the Hong Kong government suspended the bill on June 15, a larger protest took place the next day, demanding the complete withdrawal of the bill. This protest was also a reaction to the perceived excessive force used by the Hong Kong police on June 12. As the protest progressed, activists presented 5 key demands. Withdrawal of the extradition bill, as despite its suspension on June 15th, the bill could have been quickly resumed. Retraction of the riot label for protests, as the government initially labeled the June 12 protest as a riot, carrying a maximum penalty of 10 years in prison. Release and exoneration of arrested protesters, establishment of an independent inquiry into police conduct, resignation of Carrie Lam and implementation of universal suffrage. On June 12, up to 2 million people marched peacefully in the streets of Hong Kong. In response, the Hong Kong police used batons, tear gas, pepper spray, rubber bullets, and water cannons. In the continuing protests, regular street fights occurred between protesters and police. Protesters started using encrypted messaging to coordinate actions and evade police. They also began carrying homemade weapons, attacking opponents, and damaging businesses seen as supporting the police and government. After protesters damaged Beijing's liaison office in Hong Kong, a mob attacked a group of protesters in a train station, injuring many, including journalists and a pro-democracy legislator. This led to anger towards the Hong Kong police and suspicion that they were not protecting the protesters. After some incidents, the airport restricted access only to employees and travelers with flight tickets.
Fellow citizens, for more than 2 months, protests arising from the Fugitive Offenders Bill have continued.
In September 2019, Chief Executive Carrie Lam withdrew the controversial bill but didn't agree to the other 4 demands. This, along with the implementation of an anti-mask law, escalated tensions.
Enforced a law against all violent and illegal acts.
University campuses became protest hotspots as well after a student protester died during a police operation. Protesters occupied the Chinese University of Hong Kong for 5 days and fought the police at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. The police later arrested hundreds of protesters after a long standoff. All of this led to the pro-democracy camp's landslide victory in the November local election, and it became a clear sign of what the Hong Kong people want. The COVID-19 pandemic in early 2020 quieted the protests. However, tensions rose again in May 2020 after Beijing decided to implement a national security bill for Hong Kong. This led to over 100 arrests, including prominent activists, and sparked mass immigration. By mid-2020, the Hong Kong government declared peace and stability restored. Government and police approval ratings dropped to their lowest since the 1997 handover. The Central People's Government claimed for foreign powers were steering the conflict, which was largely seen as leaderless. However, this was far from the truth. Following their success in the November 2019 District Council election, the pro-democracy bloc aimed to win a majority in the Legislative Council election in September 2020. Despite the national security law, over 600,000 people voted in the bloc's first primaries. However, the Hong Kong government disqualified 12 candidates, mostly primary winners, leading to international criticism.
It is purely on the basis of protecting the health and safety of the Hong Kong people.
Carrie Lam then delayed the election, citing the pandemic. The NPCSC, removed 4 disqualified lawmakers from office in November 2020, leading to mass resignations of opposition lawmakers. The police continued to target activists and critics, arresting over 50 individuals, including business tycoon Jimmy Lai, in January 2021. The government tightened control in Hong Kong, censoring textbooks, arresting vigil organizers, deregistering teachers, and reshaping the narrative of the Yuen Long attack. This crackdown triggered a mass exodus from Hong Kong, with over 89,000 residents leaving within a year of the national security law's imposition. After the 2019 protests, Hong Kong courts are overwhelmed and many young people are in jail. The crackdown has stopped mass protests in the city. No protests were banned this year because no one applied to hold one. Most opposition leaders are either in jail, have fled abroad, or have left politics.
The great importance which the police attach to the case concerned.
For some of those who have fled, the authorities have issued arrest warrants and bounties of 1 million Hong Kong dollars. The media has also shifted its focus and now focuses on high-profile arrests and prosecutions in connection with the national law security. 4 years after the 2019 protests, the Hong Kong government itself proclaims that it has a bright future with the security law ensuring stability. However, many of the Hong Kong's leading pro-democracy voices have been jailed under the NSL. Yet most of those arrested in connection to the 2019 protests were arrested under laws that have existed for decades before the NSL. Some of these cases are still ongoing, with some defendants being held in pre-trial detention for a long time.
For me, to be honest, I had been thinking for a really long period.
And hearing all this, is it surprising that people such as Agnes Chow chose not to return to Hong Kong? As always, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. See you next time.